Welcome to Dead Air Confessions. Late at night, when the streets are empty and the signal begins to fade, people start sharing the things they never say out loud. The strange call they received, the person they saw standing outside, the night they realized they were not alone. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who carried those memories for years. Before we go on air, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a quiet, late-night feel, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions. Turn the volume down low. The line is open.
When I was 14 years old, I had to watch my younger sister at home while my mom went out somewhere. My sister was only 4 at the time, so even though I was still just a kid myself, I was old enough to be trusted to look after her for a while. It was not supposed to be a big deal. I had watched her before, and most nights were simple. She would sit with her iPad, watch YouTube, laugh at whatever video she liked, and I would sit nearby, making sure she was okay until my mom came back. Our house always felt normal to me. It was not some creepy old place, and I had never thought of it as especially scary. It was just home. But that night, for the first time, it felt like I was the only thing standing between my little sister and whatever was outside. It was around 11 at night. The house was quiet except for the sound of my sister's iPad. I was sitting in a chair in the living room, and she was on the couch, completely relaxed, watching videos like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. That is one thing I remember clearly. She was so young that she had no idea how quickly a normal night could turn into something frightening. She was just sitting there, small and comfortable, with the glow of the screen on her face. I was not really worried about anything at first. I was probably on my phone, half paying attention to her and half waiting for my mom to get back. Everything had been fine for about an hour. Then I heard 4 loud knocks on the front door. They were not soft knocks. They were not the kind of knocks someone gives when they are unsure if they have the right house. They were loud, clear, and heavy. Knock, 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 knock. The sound cut through the whole house and instantly changed the feeling in the room. My sister looked up, and I froze in my chair. I am not usually the type of person to assume the worst right away, but something about those knocks felt wrong. It was late. We were not expecting anyone. My mom was gone. My sister was only 4. I was 14, alone in the house with her, and someone was at the front door at 11 at night. My first thought was that whoever it was, I should not make contact with them. I do not know why I felt that so strongly, but I did. It was like my body understood danger before my mind had time to make a plan. I did not go to the door. I did not ask who it was right away. I stayed quiet and grabbed my phone. I texted my mom and my older sister and asked if either of them knew anyone who might be knocking at the house at that time. I wanted there to be a normal answer. Maybe my mom had sent someone over. Maybe my older sister had forgotten to tell me something. Maybe it was a neighbor with an emergency. But both of them told me no. They did not know anyone who should be there. That was when the fear really hit me. I looked at my little sister on the couch, and I knew I had to get her away from the front of the house. I did not want her near the windows or the door. I did not want her making noise or looking outside. I told her to go upstairs to my room, shut the door, hide, and not make any noise. I tried to sound serious enough that she would listen, but not so scared that she would panic. She did what I told her. She got up and went upstairs, still probably not fully understanding why. I remember feeling relieved when she was out of the living room, but that relief only lasted a second, because now I was alone downstairs with whoever was outside. I went into the kitchen and grabbed a steak knife. I know now that a knife is not exactly the best thing to use in that kind of situation, but I was 14. I did not have a real plan. I just knew I needed something in my hand. The knife made me feel like I was not completely helpless. Even though my hands were shaking and my heart was beating so hard, it felt like it was in my throat. I kept listening for more movement outside. The whole house felt too quiet. Every small sound seemed louder than normal. Even my own breathing felt too loud. There was another door on the side of the house, and the top half of it had glass panes. I suddenly remembered it was unlocked. That thought made my stomach drop. The front door was one thing, but the side door was worse because of the glass. Someone could look through it. Someone could break it. Someone could reach in. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and held it right in front of my face. I do not know why I did that. At the time, it felt safer somehow, like if someone was looking in, the light might blind them or make it harder for them to see me clearly. It probably did not make much sense, but fear makes you do strange things. With a steak knife in one hand and my phone flashlight in the other, I went toward the side door. Every step felt dangerous. I expected to see a face pressed against the glass. I expected someone to be standing right outside, waiting for me. But when I got there, I did not see anything. The darkness outside was empty, or at least it looked empty. I locked the door as fast as I could and backed away from it. Then I went through the house and locked anything that had a lock. Doors, windows, anything I could think of. I was moving fast, almost running from one place to the next, checking things again and again because I did not trust anything anymore. It probably only took me about a minute to lock everything, but it felt longer. The whole time, I was expecting another knock or a crash or the sound of someone trying to open a door. Once I was sure everything was locked, I stood there and forced myself to speak. I called out, "Who is it?" For a second, there was silence. Then whatever was outside knocked again. That sound made my blood run cold. I had asked a question, and instead of answering, it knocked. No voice, no explanation. Just another knock. It felt like whoever was outside had heard me and was choosing not to speak. That made it worse than if they had yelled or said something strange. A person with a reason to be there would answer. A neighbor would call out. A friend would say their name. My mom would have told me if someone was coming. But this person, or whatever it was, only knocked again. I repeated myself, louder this time. "Who is it?" Another knock. That was enough for me. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I knew I must have looked pale. My body felt cold and hot at the same time. I did not want to play around with it anymore. I did not want to keep asking questions. I did not want to stand near the front of the house and give whoever was outside any reason to think I might open the door. So I shut off every light I could and went upstairs. I wanted the house to look empty. I wanted it dark. I wanted whoever was outside to think nobody was going to respond anymore. The whole house was pitch black after that. I went upstairs carefully, trying not to make too much noise, and checked on my little sister. She was in my room like I had told her, and she was still watching videos on her iPad. That small glow from her screen felt strange in the dark room. She seemed calm, almost like none of this was real to her. I was thankful for that, because the last thing I wanted was for her to start crying or asking too many questions. I needed her quiet. I needed her safe. I needed to be able to think. I went to the top floor windows and looked outside from there. I checked as much of the yard as I could see. I looked toward the front of the house, toward the side, toward any place someone might be standing. I expected to see a person near the door or maybe someone walking away. But there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No figure in the yard, no car that did not belong there, no shadow moving near the house. Just darkness outside the windows. That almost made it worse. If I had seen someone leaving, at least I would have known where they were. If I had seen a car, at least there would have been something to focus on. But seeing nothing meant I had no idea where they were. They could have left. They could have been hiding near the house. They could have been standing in a blind spot where I could not see them. The darkness outside suddenly felt like it had places to hide everywhere. I stayed upstairs with my little sister for about an hour. She watched her videos, and I watched everything else. I listened for footsteps, for glass breaking, for the front door handle moving, for anything at all. But nothing happened. The silence stretched on so long that I started to question myself. Maybe whoever knocked had left. Maybe it was some dumb prank. Maybe it was a neighbor or some random person who went away when nobody opened the door. Maybe I had scared myself worse than I needed to. After an hour of nothing, my fear was still there, but curiosity started mixing with it. I wanted to know if they were really gone. I told my sister to stay upstairs. I made sure she understood not to come down. Then I went back downstairs by myself. I was still nervous, but the house had been quiet for so long that I thought maybe it was over. I turned on one light, just a lamp in the living room where I had been sitting earlier. I did not want to turn on all the lights. I did not want to make the house look fully awake again. I just wanted enough light to see. Then I did something that I still think about. I yelled out, very loudly, "If you're still here, knock again." I do not know why I said it. Maybe I wanted to prove to myself that nobody was there. Maybe I thought if there was no answer, I could calm down and stop being afraid. Maybe I wanted control over the situation, because up until then, I had only been reacting. I had been hiding, locking doors, and listening. Asking for a knock felt like a test. If nothing happened, I could tell myself it was over. But something did happen. There was a knock on the dining room window. Not the front door. Not the same place as before. The dining room window. The second I heard it, all the fear came rushing back twice as hard. That knock was not just scary because it happened. It was scary because I had waited an entire hour. I had been upstairs for an hour with my little sister, watching the windows and listening. And after all that time, when I called out into the house, something outside answered from a different spot. That meant whoever it was had not just knocked once and left. Something had stayed outside our house for at least an hour. It had waited. It had moved around. It had heard me. I turned the lamp off immediately. I did not look out the dining room window. I did not go near it. I did not want to see what was on the other side. I just went straight back upstairs, as fast as I could, without making too much noise. My whole body was shaking by then. I kept thinking about the fact that the knock had come from a window, not a door. That meant the person was close to the house, close enough to touch the glass, close enough to hear me yell from inside, close enough that if the window had been unlocked or if they had broken it, they could have gotten in. I went back to my room and stayed with my little sister. She still did not fully understand how scared I was. She was only 4. I think that was the only good thing about the whole situation. She was young enough to stay focused on her videos and not realize what was happening outside. I wanted to keep it that way. I did not want her to remember that night the way I did. I did not want her to feel the fear I was feeling. After a while, I put her to bed in her own bed. I tried to act normal for her. I tried to make sure she felt safe. She fell asleep without a problem, like nothing was wrong. I was jealous of that in a way. She could sleep because she did not know enough to be terrified. I went back to my room, but I did not sleep. I stayed awake, listening to every sound in the house, Every creak made me tense. Every small noise from outside made me hold my breath. I kept waiting for another knock. I kept waiting for glass to break. I kept waiting for footsteps on the stairs. But nothing else happened that night. Eventually, morning came, and the house looked normal again. That is always the strangest part after something frightening happens at night. The same living room where you were terrified becomes just a room again. The same dining room window that had been knocked on becomes just a window. The doors are still there. The locks are still there. The sun comes up, and everything looks too normal for what you felt. My mom was home and awake, and I tried to tell her what happened. I told her about the knocking on the front door, the texts, sending my sister upstairs, locking the doors, hiding in the dark, waiting an hour, and then yelling out only to hear a knock at the dining room window. She did not really believe me. I tried to tell other people, too. I wanted someone to understand how scary it had been. I wanted someone to admit that it was not normal for someone to stay outside a house for an hour and answer when called. But most people brushed it off. Some thought I was exaggerating. Some thought it was probably a prank. Some thought maybe I had heard something else and turned it into a knock because I was scared. No one seemed to take it as seriously as I did. Maybe looking back, it could have been something dumb. Maybe it was some teenager messing around. Maybe someone had the wrong house. Maybe it was a person trying to scare us and nothing more. But I also know how it felt to be 14 years old, alone in that house with a 4-year-old child depending on me, hearing those knocks and realizing I had to protect her. I know how it felt to check the windows upstairs and see nothing. I know how it felt to wait a full hour and then hear a knock on the dining room window right after I called out. That is the part I can never explain away. It still spooks me when I think about it. Not because something terrible happened, because thankfully nothing did. It scares me because of what could have happened. Whoever was outside knew someone was home. They knew we were not opening the door. They stayed long enough to hear me later. They moved from the front door to the dining room window. And all that time, my little sister was upstairs, small and unaware, while I sat in the dark trying to act braver than I felt. People can say it was nothing, and maybe to them it was. But to me, that night was the first time I truly understood how unsafe a house can feel when someone unknown is just outside it. A locked door feels strong until someone knocks on it at 11 at night. A window feels normal until someone taps on it after waiting in the dark for an hour. And being home alone feels easy until you realize there is no adult there to take over, no one else to decide what to do, and a little kid upstairs who trusts you to keep her safe. Nothing else ever came of it. We never found out who it was. No one admitted to a prank. No neighbor came by the next day with an explanation. There was no answer, no ending, nothing to make the night feel less strange. It just became one of those memories I carry with me. The kind that sounds simple when you explain it, but feels terrifying when you lived through it. I was 14, my sister was 4, and someone stood outside our house late at night, knocking and waiting. And after a full hour, when I dared them to answer, they did. This first story is not mine. It belongs to my cousin. And even though a lot of people in the family either do not believe him or do not like talking about it, I have never been able to forget it. It happened in 2005, and it was one of those moments that changed the family forever. His younger brother, Hunter, died in a car accident. Hunter was only 15 years old at the time. He was still so young, still at that age where people think they are untouchable, where danger feels like something that happens to other people and not to you. He was with one of his friends, who I think was around 16, and from what I understand, they were driving too fast for that road. Maybe they were showing off. Maybe they were just being careless in the way teenagers sometimes are when they do not understand how fast life can turn. Whatever the reason was, they lost control and wrapped the car around a tree. Both of them died instantly, at least as far as I know. The road where it happened was not the kind of place where you want to be going too fast. It was one of those roads where a small mistake can become something terrible before anyone has time to react. 1 second, two teenage boys were alive, probably laughing or talking or thinking about whatever they had planned next, and the next second, everything was over. There was no warning for the family, no chance to say goodbye, no chance for anyone to stop it. A phone call, a crash, a tree, and suddenly, Hunter was gone. That is the kind of loss that does not make sense at first. It feels too sharp, too sudden, like your mind refuses to accept that a person who was just alive can now be gone forever. My cousin was the first person to get there. That alone is something I would not wish on anyone. It is one thing to hear that someone you love has been in an accident. It is another thing to arrive before anyone else and see it with your own eyes. He saw the car. He saw how bad it was. He knew, probably before anyone had to tell him, that nobody could have walked away from that. I cannot imagine what that moment did to him. Seeing a wreck like that is bad enough when it involves strangers. But seeing it when your own younger brother is inside is something that would stay with you for the rest of your life. But the part of the story that he swears by, the part most people do not believe, happened when he got there. He says that after he arrived at the scene. He looked to the other side of the road and saw Hunter standing there. Not hurt, not bloody, not trapped in the car, just standing there on the other side of the road, completely unharmed. My cousin says Hunter looked like himself. He was not broken or injured the way his body was in the car. He was whole. He was calm. And then Hunter waved at him. That small detail is what always gets me. He waved. Not some dramatic movie like Goodbye, not some terrifying ghostly moment, just a simple wave. The kind of wave someone gives when they are leaving, or when they want to let you know they see you. My cousin says Hunter turned after that and walked into the trees. He did not run. He did not disappear in some huge flash of light. He just turned and walked away from the road into the tree line like he was going somewhere else. And the whole time, both bodies were still in the car. That is what makes the story so hard to explain. My cousin was not saying he saw Hunter climb out of the wreck. He was not saying Hunter survived for a few seconds and then died. He was very clear that the bodies were still inside the car. Yet he saw Hunter on the other side of the road, untouched, as if the part of him that made him Hunter had already stepped away from what had happened. Maybe that sounds impossible. Maybe that is why people do not believe him. But my cousin has always sworn that it happened exactly that way. He has never changed the story. He has never tried to make it bigger or more dramatic. He just says what he saw, and what he saw was his younger brother standing across the road, waving goodbye before walking into the woods. Most people did not believe him when he talked about it. Some thought it was grief. Some thought it was shock. Some said that because he was the first one there and saw something so horrible, his mind created an image of Hunter as a way to protect him. Maybe that is possible. The mind can do strange things during trauma. But there is also something about the way he tells it that makes it hard to dismiss. He does not tell it like someone trying to get attention. He tells it like someone who saw something real and then learned that people would rather call him crazy than sit with the possibility that he might be telling the truth. Eventually, he stopped talking about it. I think being doubted over and over became too painful. Losing Hunter was already enough. Having people question the one strange, maybe comforting, maybe haunting thing he saw afterward probably made it worse. So he kept it to himself. But I have always wondered what that moment felt like for him. Was he scared when he saw Hunter? Was he comforted? Did he understand right away that it was some kind of goodbye? Or did it only hit him later, when he had time to think about the fact that Hunter's body had never left the car? I do not know what I believe about life after death, not fully. Some days I think there has to be something more. Other days I do not know. But stories like my cousin's make me pause. Because if what he saw was real, then maybe Hunter did not leave in fear. Maybe he was allowed one last moment to show someone in the family that he was not suffering anymore. Maybe he waved because he knew my cousin needed to see him that way, whole and unharmed, before the truth of the accident destroyed him. Maybe walking into the trees was not meant to be scary. Maybe it was just the only way my cousin's mind could understand a soul leaving this world. Or maybe people are right, and it was shock. Maybe his brain could not handle what his eyes were seeing in that car, so it created Hunter somewhere else, safe and untouched, just for 1 second. But even if that is the explanation, it is still powerful. It means love and grief can be so strong that the mind gives you one last image of the person you lost, not as they died, but as you want to remember them. Still, my cousin never called it a vision or a dream. He always said he saw Hunter. He saw him wave. He saw him turn and walk into the trees. And to him, it was real. The second story is mine, and it is about my grandmother. When she died, I was devastated. I do not think I can explain how much I loved her in a way that does her justice. Some people are just warm to be around. Their presence feels like home, even when they are not doing anything special. My grandmother was like that for me. I loved the way she looked, the way she carried herself, the feeling of being near her, and even the way she smelled. That might sound like a strange thing to mention, but it matters because she had a very distinct smell. It was not just perfume, at least not to me. It was her. It was the smell of her clothes, her house, her skin, maybe the soap she used or something she kept around her. I cannot describe it perfectly, but I knew it instantly. If I smelled it anywhere, I would have known it belonged to her. By the time she was near the end of her life, things were difficult. She was not fully herself anymore in the way we all wanted her to be. She had trouble recognizing people, and that was one of the most painful parts of watching her decline. When someone you love starts to forget faces, even familiar ones, it feels like you are losing them in pieces before they are actually gone. My mom, her own daughter, was not always recognized by her. That hurt everyone. But somehow, I was one of the last people she was still able to recognize before she died. I do not know why. I do not know what part of her memory held on to me when other parts were slipping away. But it meant something to me then, and it means even more to me now. The day she died, before I knew it would be the day, I was in my room reading. It was afternoon, not late at night, not during some dramatic storm or anything like that. It was an ordinary moment. I was sitting there by myself, focused on whatever I was reading, and the house was normal around me. Nobody had brought anything from my grandmother's house into ours. Nobody had recently visited her and come back carrying her scent on their clothes. There was no blanket, no sweater, no pillow, no perfume bottle, nothing that could explain what happened. That is important because I have gone over it many times in my head, trying to find a normal reason. All of a sudden, I smelled her. It did not come slowly, like a faint scent, drifting in from another room. It was sudden and full, like I had been wrapped in it. One moment I was sitting in my room reading, and the next I was completely surrounded by my grandmother's smell. It was so strong and so familiar that I froze. I knew it immediately. There was no doubt in my mind. It was not just something similar. It was not a random scent my brain connected to her. It was her smell, the exact one I knew from being near her. It filled the space around me and stayed there. At first, I did not know what to think. I was freaked out because there was no reason for it to be happening. I looked around my room, almost expecting to find something that explained it. But there was nothing. I had not opened anything. There were no clothes of hers in my room. There was no object from her house. Nobody in my family had anything with them that smelled like her. We had not seen her recently enough for the scent to be clinging to someone. Yet there it was, surrounding me as clearly as if she were standing beside me. It did not feel like a normal smell either. It felt personal. It felt directed at me. That is hard to explain without sounding dramatic, but it is the truth. A random smell passing through a room does not usually make you feel like someone has entered the space. This did. It felt like her presence had come into my room, not in a scary way, but in a way that was so sudden and strong that it shook me. I remember sitting there, breathing it in, trying to understand how something impossible could feel so real. My little sister came into the room at some point, and I asked her about it. I wanted someone else to smell it too. I wanted proof that I was not imagining it. But she did not smell anything. To her, the room was normal. That made me feel even stranger. I knew what I smelled. I knew it was there. But the fact that she could not smell it made it seem like it was only meant for me. That scared me a little, because when something happens that only you can sense, it is easy for other people to dismiss it. It is easy for them to say it is in your head. But sometimes you know what you felt. Sometimes you know what you experienced, even if nobody else can confirm it. Later, my grandmother died. And when that happened, the smell in my room made sense to me in a way nothing else could. I believe she came to say goodbye. I know some people will say that grief made me imagine it, but that does not fit for me, because it happened before I knew she was gone. I was not sitting there mourning her death yet. I was not trying to summon a memory of her. I was just reading in my room when her smell appeared around me out of nowhere. If grief had caused it, I would understand people doubting me. But this happened that afternoon, on the day of the night she died, before the full weight of it had settled on me. People have told me it was all in my head. They say maybe I wanted to smell her, or maybe I remembered her scent so strongly that my brain created it. Maybe they are right about how the brain can work, but I do not believe that is what happened. This was not a weak memory of her smell. It was not me thinking about her and suddenly imagining it. It was physical. It was around me. It was there. I could breathe it in. It stayed with me long enough that I had time to notice it, question it, and even bring my sister into it. The part I keep coming back to is that I was one of the last people she recognized. Even when she did not recognize my mom, she still recognized me. I do not say that to make myself sound more important than anyone else. I know she loved all of us, but I do wonder if there was something in that connection that remained strong until the end. Maybe some part of her knew I needed goodbye. Maybe some part of her reached for the people she could still remember. Maybe the smell was the only way she could come to me, because that was one of the things I loved and remembered most about her. I loved everything about my grandmother. I loved being around her. I loved her soul, her warmth, the way she made me feel, losing her hurt in a way that left a space behind. But that moment in my room, as strange as it was, gave me something to hold on to. It made me feel like she had not just disappeared. It made me feel like she had passed through one last time, gently, quietly, without frightening me, just letting me know she was there. I do not expect everyone to believe it. I know stories about smells and goodbyes can sound too easy to explain away. People can say memory is powerful, that the mind plays tricks, that grief makes people sense things that are not really there. Maybe that is true sometimes. But I also think there are moments in life that belong only to the person who experiences them. They are not meant to convince the whole world. They are not meant to become proof. They are simply something you know, deep down, because you were there. For my cousin, it was seeing Hunter across the road, unharmed, waving before he walked into the trees while his body was still in the car. For me, it was sitting alone in my room and suddenly being surrounded by my grandmother's unmistakable smell on the very day she died. Both stories are different, but they carry the same feeling. They are about people we loved leaving in a way that did not feel completely silent. They are about strange goodbyes that nobody else could fully understand. Maybe death is the end, and maybe these things are just the mind trying to soften the pain. But I do not think so. I think sometimes, when someone leaves suddenly or when someone is deeply loved, there is a moment where they reach back. Maybe it is a wave from across the road. Maybe it is a familiar scent filling a quiet bedroom. Maybe it is something small, something only one person notices, but powerful enough to stay with them forever. I cannot prove either story. My cousin cannot prove what he saw, and I cannot prove what I smelled. But I believe him, and I believe what happened to me. I believe Hunter gave one last wave before moving on. And I believe my grandmother came to me in the only way she could, surrounding me with the smell I loved so much, letting me know she was near, and saying goodbye before she was gone. When I was 6 years old, I watched my mother die in front of me. Technically, she lived for 7 more days after that because she was put on a ventilator, but that is not how it felt to me. In my mind, my mother died in the house I grew up in. That was the place where I saw everything change. That was the place where I saw her stop being the mother I knew and become someone the adults were trying to save. I was too young to understand all the medical details, but I understood enough to know that something terrible was happening. She could not breathe. She was suffering. There was blood, panic, and a kind of fear in the house that no child should ever have to feel. Even though machines kept her body alive for a little while after that, the version of my mother I knew was taken from me right there at home. After she passed, the house did not feel the same anymore. I was only 6, so I did not know how to explain grief. I did not know how to talk about shock, trauma, or how a place can feel haunted by a memory before anything supernatural even happens. I just knew my mother was gone and everything around me felt wrong. The rooms looked the same, but they were not the same. The hallways were the same. The stairs were the same. The basement was the same. But the feeling inside the house had changed. There was an emptiness in it. It was like the whole place knew she was missing. About a month or 2 after she died, something happened in the basement that I have never been able to forget. I was down there playing with my babysitter's daughter. We were inside a little playhouse, doing normal kid stuff, probably pretending and making up games the way children do. I remember the basement being familiar to me. It was part of the house I grew up in, so I was used to it. It was not some strange place where I was already scared. I was just playing. My friends stayed inside the playhouse, but something caught my eye outside of it. I do not remember exactly what made me look. Maybe it was movement. Maybe it was a shift in the light. Maybe it was that strange feeling you get when something near you changes, even before you know what it is. I stepped out of the playhouse because I was curious. The moment I looked, I was stunned. There was a dark female shadow walking out of the room where my mother used to feed the cats when she was alive. I do not mean I saw a vague shadow and later decided it reminded me of her. I mean that in that moment as a child, I knew exactly who it looked like. It looked like my mother. The shape was so close to her that I could not mistake it for anyone else. She had been about 5'1", and the shadow looked the same height. The body shape was the same. Even the way the short hair sat against the neck looked like hers. It was not just a tall, dark figure or a random shape on the wall. It was a female shadow that looked like a perfect outline of my mother. What made it even stranger was that a cat was following her. That detail still gives me chills because the shadow was coming from the same room where my mother would normally feed the cats when she was alive. It was such a normal thing connected to her. It was part of her routine. She would go into that room, feed them, and move through the house like she always had. And now, after she was gone, I was watching a shadow that looked exactly like her walk out of that same room, with a cat following behind her like nothing had changed. I just stood there. I did not scream. I did not run. I do not remember feeling happy, and I do not remember feeling afraid either. It was almost like my body and mind could not decide what to feel. So everything went quiet inside me. I was completely stunned. Time seemed to slow down or stop. I watched the shadows move along the walls, and I remember the light looking warm, almost like the kind of shadows you see on a sunny day when sunlight comes through a window and stretches shapes across a room. It did not feel like a horror movie moment. It felt unreal, like I had stepped into a memory that was somehow moving on its own. My friend saw enough to be creeped out. I do not talk to her anymore, but I remember that she was frightened by it. For me, it was different. I was not calm because I understood it. I was calm because I was too shocked to react. I watched as the shadow of my mother and the cat moved toward the stairs. Then, when they reached the stairs, the steps creaked. That sound is one of the details I always come back to. The stairs made the same creaking noise they normally made when weight was put on them. It was not just a shadow passing over a wall. It was as if something was actually there, moving with enough presence to make the stairs respond. Then, it was over. I do not remember a dramatic ending. I do not remember the figure turning to look at me or disappearing in a flash. I just remember standing there, trying to understand what I had seen. I was 6 years old, and my mother had only been gone for a short time. I had watched something that looked exactly like her move through the basement, in the place where she used to do something ordinary and familiar. A cat followed her, and the stairs creaked under her as if she still belonged in the house. That was the last time I ever saw her like that, but it was not the only strange thing that happened after her death. I also had a dream that has stayed with me my entire life. It was not like a normal dream that fades after you wake up. It was vivid, emotional, and clear in a way that still feels different from other dreams. In the dream, my mother came down from heaven to visit me and tell me goodbye. I know that sounds like something from a children's cartoon, and in some ways, that is exactly how it looked. She came down from the sky on a beam of light, just like the way heaven is shown in cartoons or movies. The clouds were thick and soft-looking, almost like cotton. They were so bright white that they almost hurt to look at, and everything about the sky felt huge and glowing. I was not raised in a very religious way, which makes the dream even stranger to me now. I did not grow up with strong ideas about heaven, angels, or what the afterlife was supposed to look like. I was only 6 years old. I had not been taught some detailed picture of what happens after death. But in the dream, my mother appeared like an angel. She was not scary. She was not sick. She was not the way I had last seen her in real life. She was peaceful, whole, and beautiful in the way a child wants to remember their mother. She told me she could not stay very long, but she never really explained why she had come. I think I just understood that she was there to see me. The dream took place within about a half-mile area of the neighborhood where I grew up, but it did not look exactly like the real neighborhood. That is another detail I find strange now as an adult. In the dream, there were no houses, no buildings, no familiar structures. Instead, the area was open, with plain brown fields that had been plowed but had nothing growing in them. It was like the neighborhood had been stripped down to land and sky. I do not know why a 6-year-old mind would create that. I do not know why I would imagine the place I knew without all the homes and streets and normal details. But that is how it looked. I cannot remember everything that happened between the moment she came down from the sky and the moment she had to leave again. That part is blurry. What I do remember is the feeling that we spent quality time together. It felt like I had been given time with her that I did not get in real life. Maybe we talked. Maybe we walked. Maybe I just got to be near her again. The details are gone, but the emotion is still there. I remember the feeling of being with my mother, and I remember how real it felt. It was not like I was watching a dream happen. It felt like I was actually with her. Then the time came for her to go back. In the dream, my father, my mother, and I got into my childhood family car. We drove her to the plain plowed field, the empty one with no houses around it. It was understood that this was where she had to leave from. I did not want her to go. I begged her to stay on Earth with me. I remember the pain of that moment so clearly. It hurt in the dream, and it still hurt when I woke up. It felt like losing her all over again. I had already lost her once, but now I was being forced to say goodbye with full awareness. I wanted to keep her there. I wanted to undo what had happened. I wanted her to stay in the car, stay in the field, stay in my life. But she told me she had to return. She told me everything would be okay. Those words mattered. As a child who had just lost her mother in a sudden and terrible way, I needed someone to tell me that. I needed her to tell me that. The way she said it in the dream made me feel both heartbroken and peaceful at the same time. My heart ached because she was leaving, but there was also comfort in it. She did not seem afraid. She did not seem trapped. She seemed like she knew where she was going, and she wanted me to know that I would be all right. Then the bright sky opened. A beam of light came down again, and it was time for her to leave. In the dream, the beam was almost like an escalator made of light. She stepped onto it and began to rise upward. As she went up, she waved goodbye to me. I watched her go, feeling that deep pain of separation, but also feeling like I was being given something I had not been given in real life. A goodbye. A final moment. A memory of her leaving peacefully instead of the terrible way I had last seen her. When she reached the opening in the sky, she and the beam of light disappeared. The clouds closed behind her. Then I went home to live a normal life. That is how the dream ended. Immediately after that, I woke up. When I first woke up, I remember feeling deserted for a few seconds. It was like she had been taken from me again, and I was back in the real world without her. But that feeling did not last long. It was quickly replaced by a strange sense of closure. I felt sad, but also calm. I felt like she had visited me to tell me that she was okay and that I could keep going. At 6 years old, I did not have the words for that, but I felt it. As an adult, I look back and wonder if that dream was her way of telling me she had passed on and was at peace. I still think about whether it was really her or whether it was my young mind trying to protect me. Maybe my subconscious created the dream because I needed peace after seeing her suffer so badly. Maybe my mind gave me a better goodbye because the real one had been too painful. That is possible. The brain is powerful, especially in children dealing with grief. But there are things about the dream that still make me wonder. I was not raised with strong religious imagery, yet the dream showed heaven, clouds, light, and my mother as an angel. I saw my neighborhood transformed into empty plowed fields, which feels like such an unusual thing for a small child to imagine. And the emotions were so real that I can still feel them now. There have been other times over the years when my mother seemed to make herself known in the house. My father still lives in my childhood home, and there have been many occasions where people have heard things that remind us of her. Footsteps pacing the hallways, the sound of typing on a keyboard, little noises that feel too familiar to ignore. My family has heard them too. It is not just me. In fact, we sometimes joke that she still lives among us. It is our way of making something strange feel comforting instead of frightening. But I was the only one who ever saw her, at least as far as I know. That moment in the basement was mine. The dream was mine too. Maybe she came back only to say goodbye to me because I was her child, and because the last image I had of her was so painful. Maybe she did not want me to remember only the bathroom, the panic, the suffocation, the blood and the horror of her body failing. Maybe she wanted to replace that memory with something softer. A shadow walking through the house like she always had. A cat following her like nothing had changed. A dream where she came from the sky, spent time with me, told me everything would be okay, and waved goodbye as she returned to the light. I never had another dream about her after that. That also feels important to me. It was not something that happened over and over because I was constantly thinking about her. It happened once, and it felt complete. It felt like a visit with a purpose. After that, I still missed her, of course. I still carried the pain of losing her, but there was a part of me that felt like I had been given permission to go on. Not to forget her, but to live. As an adult, I still do not know exactly what I believe. Part of me can look at it logically and say that a grieving 6-year-old child might see and dream things that help them survive an unbearable loss. But another part of me, the part that was there, the part that saw the shadow and heard the stairs creak, the part that woke from that dream with closure in my chest, believes my mother came back. Not to scare me, not to haunt the house in some dark way, just to say goodbye. And maybe that is why the house never felt completely empty after she died. Maybe some part of her stayed close to us. Maybe love leaves an echo in the places where it once lived. Maybe that echo can sound like footsteps in a hallway, typing on a keyboard, or stairs creaking under a shadow that looks exactly like the person you lost. Maybe sometimes, when death is sudden and brutal, the people who leave still find a way to come back gently, just long enough to be remembered in peace. I do not know if what I saw in the basement was my mother's spirit. I do not know if the dream was truly her visiting me or my mind creating what I needed. But I know both experiences changed the way I carried her death. I had watched her die in a way no child should ever witness, and for a while, that was the memory that owned everything. Then came the shadow in the basement, moving through the room where she fed the cats. Then came the dream, with the white clouds, the beam of light, the goodbye, and her promise that everything would be okay. Those are the memories I choose to hold beside the painful one, not because they erase what happened, but because they remind me that my mother was more than the way she died. She was the person who fed the cats. She was the woman whose shape I could recognize even as a shadow. She was the mother who came down from the sky in a dream to comfort her child. And whether it was real in a spiritual sense or real only in my heart, it gave me something I desperately needed. It gave me goodbye. When I was around 6 or 7 years old, at least that is my best guess, something happened at my grandma's house that I have never been able to explain in a way that fully makes sense to me. It was not some huge, terrifying event with shadows in the hallway or someone standing over my bed in the middle of the night. It happened in the morning, in a normal room, while I was eating breakfast and watching a children's show on TV. That is part of what makes it so strange to me. It did not happen in the dark. It did not happen when I was half asleep. It happened during the day, when everything should have felt safe and normal. My parents and I were at my grandma's house. I do not remember if we were visiting for a few days or just staying over for some reason, but I remember the house feeling familiar. It was one of those places that had its own smell and mood, the kind of home you remember from childhood, even if the details become blurry later. I was young enough that mornings were simple. Someone gave me breakfast, the TV was turned on, and I sat on the sofa, eating and watching whatever children's program was playing. I think I was eating cereal, or something close to that. I can still picture myself sitting there with a bowl, focused more on eating than on anything else. The room itself was quiet, except for the TV. I was alone in there. My mom and grandma were in the kitchen, close enough that I could run to them if I needed to, but not in the room with me. I was not scared. I was not thinking about anything strange. I was just watching the show and eating like any normal kid. The program on TV was a children's show, and there was a woman on it, maybe a host or presenter, along with a man who seemed like a co-host. The woman was friendly, the kind of person who speaks in that warm, cheerful way people use on shows made for kids. The man was there too, smiling and watching, almost like he was part of whatever she was doing. At first, I was not paying full attention to what they were saying. I was concentrating on my breakfast. When you are little, eating cereal in front of the TV can feel like an important job. You stare at the screen, but sometimes your mind is more focused on the spoon, the bowl, the taste, or trying not to spill anything. So I think the woman may have been speaking for a few seconds before I really noticed what she was saying. But then her words suddenly reached me in a way that made me stop. I swear she was talking about me. I remember hearing something like, "Look, he is eating now." That was the part that hit me. It was not just a random sentence that happened to sound similar. It felt like she was looking at me through the TV and commenting on what I was doing at that exact moment. I was eating. I was sitting there alone with my breakfast, and she said, "Look, he is eating now." The way she said it felt casual and friendly, not scary. But that did not make it less shocking. If anything, the friendly tone made it stranger, because it felt like she already knew me, like I was part of the show somehow. I froze for a second. I was only 6 or 7, so my mind did not go through a long list of possible explanations. I did not think about broadcasting, timing, pre-recorded shows, or coincidences. I just felt that sudden shock of hearing a person on TV say something that seemed directly connected to me. My stomach dropped. The room, which had felt normal a moment before, suddenly felt different. The TV was not just a TV anymore. It felt like something on the other side of the screen could see me. I got scared and jumped up from the sofa. My first thought was to get to the kitchen where my mom and grandma were. I wanted adults. I wanted someone to tell me what was going on. I wanted to leave the room because the whole situation felt too real. But as I started running out, I heard the woman on the TV speak again. She said something like, "Don't leave, come back, come back." That made it even worse. If the first sentence had only been a coincidence, then how did the second one match what I was doing too? I was leaving the room, and she was telling me not to leave. She was telling me to come back. The timing was perfect in the worst possible way. It felt like she had noticed me getting up and was calling after me. I remember being shocked in that deep childhood way, where fear and confusion mix together and you do not know whether to cry, run, or just stare. I ran into the kitchen and told my mom what had happened. My grandma was there too. I do not remember exactly what I said because I was so young, but I know I tried to explain that the lady on the TV had talked to me. I told them she said I was eating, and then when I left, she told me to come back. I probably expected them to be surprised, or maybe even come with me to check the TV. But adults do not always react the way children hope they will. I think my mom treated it like a cute story, or maybe she said something like, "Oh, that's cool," without really believing there was anything strange about it. At that age, I do not think I fully understood how dismissive that was. I may have been scared, but I also wanted to believe maybe it was something fun or special. Kids can move from fear to excitement very quickly if adults do not act worried. So after telling them, I went back to the living room. And this is the part that feels embarrassing now, but it is also one of the clearest details I remember. I came back into the room jumping and loudly said, "I'm back." I said it like I expected the people on the TV to respond. That sounds silly now, but to a little kid, it made sense. If the woman had really told me to come back, then maybe she would notice when I returned. Maybe she would say something else. Maybe the man would smile bigger, or maybe they would welcome me back into whatever strange conversation had started. I was not trying to be funny. I was testing it. I wanted to know if the TV people had really seen me, or if I had imagined it. I wanted the moment to continue so I could prove it happened. But they did not respond. They just kept doing whatever they were doing on the show. They ignored me completely. The woman was no longer talking about me eating. She was no longer telling me to come back. The man was not reacting to me. They were on a completely different subject, acting like nothing had happened. It felt like I had missed the only moment where the screen had opened somehow, and now it was closed again. I remember feeling disappointed, confused, and a little embarrassed. In my little kid brain, I probably thought something like, "Really? You told me to come back, and now you are ignoring me?" Looking back, I know there are normal explanations people can give. The easiest one is that it was a coincidence. Maybe the woman on the show said, "Look, he is eating now," as part of the program. Maybe there was a child on the show eating something, or maybe they were talking about a character. Maybe when I got scared and left, she happened to say, "Don't leave, come back," because that was also part of the show. Children's programs often talk directly to the camera. They often say things like, "Come back," or "Look at this," or "Don't go away." Maybe I was just the perfect age to think it was meant for me. I understand that explanation. I really do. If someone told me the same story, I would probably think coincidence too. A kid sitting alone, half listening to a children's show, hears a line that matches what he is doing and gets scared. Then he hears another line that matches him leaving and remembers it as more direct than it was. That is possible. I know memory can change things, especially memories from when we were very young. But the reason I still think about it is because of how real it felt in the moment. It was not just the words, it was the timing. It was the way the woman seemed to be looking out of the screen. It was the co-host man beside her, smiling and watching as if he also knew what was happening. I remember the woman speaking in a friendly voice, not like she was reading a scary line, but like she was casually pointing me out. The whole thing felt personal. It felt like they were aware of me. And then, when I came back, the show had moved on too quickly. That is the part that still bothers me. If it had really been part of the show, then you would expect the subject to continue for at least a little while. If they were talking about someone eating, there should have been something on screen connected to that. If they were telling someone to come back, there should have been a reason for that too. But when I returned only a short time later, they were on a completely different topic. It did not feel like I had just missed a normal part of the show. It felt like whatever had happened was already gone. Maybe I was out of the room longer than I remember. Maybe my mom and grandma spoke to me for more time than I think, and by the time I returned, the show had naturally moved on. That is possible too. But in my memory, it all happened very fast. I heard the woman talk about me eating. I ran to the kitchen. I told my mom. Then I went back and announced that I was back. It could not have been that long. It felt like seconds, maybe a minute or two at most. Another strange part is how clearly I remember the feeling of being watched. The TV did not feel like a flat screen showing a program anymore. It felt like a window. That is hard to explain without sounding dramatic, but that is the best way I can describe it. I was not terrified in the way you would be if you saw a monster. It was more like being suddenly noticed by something that should not be able to notice you. The woman was friendly, but that did not make it normal. A friendly voice calling out from the TV can still be frightening if you believe it is speaking directly to you. As I got older, I stopped telling the story much because it sounds like a childish misunderstanding. I know that. It is not the kind of story that convinces anyone. There is no proof. There was no one else in the room. My mom and grandma did not hear it. I do not know the name of the show. I cannot go back and check the episode. All I have is the memory of being a small child on a sofa, eating breakfast, and hearing a woman on a children's program say, "Look, he is eating now," right as I was eating alone in front of her. Still, the memory stayed with me. It stayed because it was so specific. It was not just, the TV scared me. It was not just, I thought a character looked at me. It was a direct match to what I was doing, followed by another direct match when I left the room. I know coincidences happen, but two in a row with that timing felt like more than that to me. Sometimes I wonder if children are more open to strange things because they do not have the same walls adults have in their minds. Maybe kids notice things adults ignore. Maybe their brains connect dots that are not really there. Maybe both can be true. A child's imagination can be powerful, but so can a child's honesty. I was not trying to make up a scary story. I was not trying to get attention. I was just a little kid who heard something impossible and ran to tell the adults. And honestly, part of me still feels annoyed at the people on the TV. That sounds ridiculous, but I remember coming back into the room, jumping and saying, "I'm back," with this childish hope that they would answer. And they did not. They just kept going with the show like nothing had happened. At the time, that felt rude, almost like they had pulled me into something and then pretended they had not. In a kid's mind, that is enough to make you think. Assholes. I know most people would probably say it was all a massive coincidence. The woman may have said those exact things as part of the show, and I may have happened to be doing the same actions at the same time. Maybe the co-host man was smiling at the camera because that is what children's hosts do. Maybe when I came back, they were on a different subject because the show moved quickly, as kids' shows often do. That explanation is simple, and maybe it is right, but it has never felt completely right to me. The memory still feels too real. The timing still feels too perfect. The way the woman spoke still feels too directed at me. Even now, when I think about that morning, I can picture the sofa, the breakfast, the quiet room, the TV, and the moment my little brain realized the woman on the screen seemed to know what I was doing. I can remember the shock of hearing her tell me not to leave when I ran out. I can remember going back and trying to make it happen again. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was just a little kid who misunderstood a children's program. But if I was wrong, it was one of the strangest and most perfectly timed misunderstandings I have ever had. Because for those few seconds, sitting alone in my grandma's living room, it really felt like the people inside the TV could see me. And after all these years, I still find myself asking the same thing. Was it really just a coincidence? Am I wrong? Am I wrong?
We will get back to the next confession in a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more real stories from people who experienced something they still cannot explain. Your support helps keep these late-night broadcasts alive. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has unsettled you the most so far. Now, let's return to the signal.
I was about 15 or 16 years old when this happened, and even though it was not the most dramatic thing in the world, it still bothered me because of how clear and direct it was. I had always been scared of ghosts when I was a kid. I was the kind of person who could hear one strange sound in a quiet house and immediately start thinking about something, standing in the hallway. I knew a lot of that was probably my imagination, but fear does not always care what makes sense. Even as I got older, there were certain places that made me feel uneasy for no clear reason. My grandma's house became one of those places after my grandpa died. Before he passed away, the house had felt different. It had always been an old, familiar place to me. It was not scary in the way abandoned houses are scary, and it was not run down or anything like that. It was just my grandma's house, the place where family visited, where people talked, ate, and spent time together. But after my grandpa died, the house changed for me. I do not mean the walls changed or the furniture moved or anything like that. I mean the feeling changed. It felt heavier, quieter, like something was missing, but still somehow present at the same time. It is hard to explain unless you have been in a home after someone important has died there, or after someone who lived there for years is suddenly gone. The house still looks the same, but it does not feel the same. I used to mow my grandma's land on the weekends. She had about 3 acres, so it was not a small job. It took time, and depending on the weather, it could be tiring. Sometimes my grandma was home while I was there, but sometimes she was not. Because of that, I had a key to the house. If I needed water, needed to use the bathroom, or just needed to take a break, I could let myself in. That was normal. I had done it before. But even though I had permission to be there, I never liked going inside alone after my grandpa died. There was always this strange feeling in the house when nobody else was there. It was not always intense. Sometimes it was just a small feeling, like I was being watched from another room. Sometimes it felt like the air inside was too still. Other times it felt like the house was waiting for me to leave. I know that sounds strange, but that is the best way I can describe it. When I was outside mowing, everything was fine. The sound of the mower, the open land, the daylight, and the normal work kept me grounded. But the second I stepped inside that house alone, I became more aware of every little noise. The hum of appliances, the creak of the floor, the sound of the door closing behind me. It all made me nervous in a way I did not want to admit. One Sunday, I was there mowing like usual. I do not remember anything being especially different about that day. It was just another weekend, and I was doing the job I had done many times before. At some point, I took a break and decided to go inside to get some water. I had probably been outside for a while, and mowing 3 acres can make you hot and thirsty fast. I went up to the house with no big thoughts in my head. I was not expecting anything weird. I was not trying to scare myself. I just wanted a drink. The layout of the house is important because of where I was standing when it happened. As soon as you walk into the house, if you look to the right, there is a hallway. At the end of that hallway is the laundry room. The laundry room door is not like a normal lightweight inside door. It is heavy, really heavy for an interior door. I do not know why it was built that way, but it was not one of those doors that swings easily with a breeze. It took effort to open and close. The hinges were not smooth either. They were stiff, almost locked up in that old door way where the door does not move unless someone really pushes it. You had to actually pull or press it to get it to shut properly. That is one of the main reasons I never accepted the explanation people gave me later. If it had been a light door, maybe I could have believed it was the wind. If the hinges had been loose and the door moved easily, maybe a draft could have slammed it. But this door was not like that. I knew that door. I had opened and closed it before. It was the kind of door that made you use your arm, not just your fingertips. It did not casually drift shut on its own. So I walked up to the house, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The moment I opened the door and entered, I looked to the right down the hallway. I do not even know why I looked that way. It was almost automatic. Maybe because that hallway always made me feel a little uneasy, or maybe because some part of me noticed movement before I understood it. Whatever the reason, I turned my head and looked straight toward the laundry room. The laundry room door was wide open. Then it slammed shut. Hard, it did not slowly swing closed. It did not ease shut like a door caught by a small draft. It slammed. The sound cracked through the house so loudly that it made my whole body tense up. I froze right where I was standing. For a second, I could not even move. I just stared down the hallway at the closed door, trying to understand what I had just seen. The house had been quiet. I had just walked in. There was nobody there, at least nobody I knew about. And that heavy laundry room door, which had been wide open, had just slammed shut with force. I remember the feeling that came over me instantly. It was like all the air in the house changed. One moment I was a teenager walking in to get water, and the next I was standing in a silent house, staring down a hallway, feeling like I had just walked in on something that did not want me there. My heart started beating fast. I could feel that cold rush of fear through my chest and stomach. It was not like hearing a random sound from another room. I had seen it happen. I had looked down the hallway at the exact moment the door slammed. There was no confusion about what I had heard. I saw the door go from open to shut. After a few seconds, I made myself move. I knew I had to check it. Part of me did not want to, of course. Every scary movie and every childhood fear in my brain told me not to walk toward that door. But another part of me needed an explanation. I did not want to run out of the house without knowing if someone was inside. I did not want to leave and spend the rest of the day wondering if there had been an intruder, an animal, or something else in that room. So I slowly went down the hallway toward the laundry room. Every step felt too loud. The hallway felt longer than it normally did. I kept my eyes on the door the whole time, expecting it to move again or open by itself. It did not. It just sat there, closed, like nothing had happened. I reached it and opened it carefully. I looked inside the laundry room, expecting to find something obvious. Maybe something had fallen against the door. Maybe a basket had tipped over. Maybe there was a window open and a strong wind had pushed it. Maybe someone was hiding in there. But there was nothing. Nothing had fallen. Nothing was leaning against the door. There was no obvious gust of air. No open window that explained it. No person. No animal. Nothing that made sense. I checked the room as best as I could, and then I checked the rest of the house. I did not search like a police officer, but I looked around enough to know I was alone. There was no one hiding in the rooms, no signs that anyone had broken in, no sound of someone moving, no footsteps, no voice, no second door opening or closing. The house was just quiet again, which somehow made it worse. If I had found a normal explanation, I would have been scared for a minute and then moved on. But finding nothing left the fear sitting there with no place to go. The whole time, that laundry room door stayed in my mind. I kept thinking about how heavy it was. I kept thinking about the way it slammed. Not shut, but slammed, like someone had grabbed it and forced it closed. I had not been imagining it. I had not heard the sound from outside and misunderstood. I had stepped into the house, looked down the hallway, and watched it happen. That is what made it so hard to brush off. Eventually, I decided I was done being inside. I do not even remember if I got the water I came in for. Maybe I did quickly, or maybe I forgot completely. What I remember is wanting to leave the house. I walked back outside, and the second I got into the open air, I felt a little better. The yard, the mower, and the daylight were all still there. Everything outside was normal. I went back to mowing and finished what I had to do, but I was freaked out the rest of the time. I kept looking back at the house. I kept thinking about that hallway and that door. I did not want to go back inside alone again. Later, I told my parents and my grandma what had happened. I explained it clearly. I told them I had walked in, looked down the hallway, and seen the laundry room door slam shut by itself. I told them I checked the room and the house and found no explanation. I told them how heavy the door was and how stiff the hinges were. But nobody believed me. They all said it was probably a draft. That was the easy answer, and I get why they wanted to use it. A draft is normal. A draft is simple. A draft does not make you question whether something strange is happening in your grandma's house after your grandpa has died. But I knew that explanation did not fit. That door was too heavy. The hinges were too stiff. It was hard enough to close on your own, even when you were trying. It was not the kind of door that could be pushed shut by a small breeze from another room. And even if there had been a draft, where did it come from? I had just opened the front door and stepped inside, yes, but the laundry room was down the hallway. The door did not just move a little. It slammed with force. It felt deliberate. I am not saying I know for sure it was a ghost. I cannot prove that, and I am not going to pretend I can. Maybe there was some strange air pressure thing that happened when I opened the front door. Maybe the house shifted. Maybe some combination of things caused that heavy door to close at the exact moment I looked at it. I know houses can do odd things. Old doors, air movement, loose frames, and pressure changes can all create strange moments. But I also know what that door was like, and I know what I saw. The part that still stays with me is the timing. I did not hear it after I had been inside for a while. I did not come back later and find the door closed. It happened right as I stepped in, right as I looked down the hallway. It was almost like something wanted me to see it. The door was wide open, then it slammed shut as soon as I entered. That is why it felt personal. It felt like a warning or a message, even if I do not know what that message would have been. Maybe the house was just settling. Maybe my grandpa was still there in some way. Maybe it was something else entirely. I do not know. I only know that after my grandpa died, that house never felt the same to me. I had already felt strange being there alone, and that day only made it worse. It confirmed the feeling I had tried to ignore, the feeling that the empty house was not really empty. People can laugh it off and say it was a draft, but they were not standing there. They did not see the door. They did not hear the force behind it. They did not know the way my stomach dropped when it happened. They did not walk down that hallway afterward, scared of what might be behind the door. They did not stand in that laundry room, looking for any possible explanation and finding none. I still think about it sometimes. It was such a small thing, just a door closing. But it was one of those moments that feels bigger when you experience it. A door is not supposed to slam shut by itself in an empty house. A heavy door with stiff hinges is not supposed to move like someone shoved it. And when it happens in a house that already feels strange after someone has passed away, it is hard not to wonder if maybe you were not as alone as you thought. I went back outside that day, finished my work, and left. Nothing else happened, at least not then. But from that point on, I never felt completely comfortable going into my grandma's house alone. I would still do it if I had to, but I was always alert. I always noticed that hallway. I always noticed the laundry room door, and I always remembered the sound it made when it slammed shut in front of me, for no reason I could explain. I live at the bottom of a mountain that has had strange stories attached to it for as long as I can remember. Around here, almost everyone knows at least one of them. Some people talk about a haunted house hidden somewhere up the mountain. Others say the spirits of people who died there never really left. Years before I was born, a plane crashed into the mountain, killing everyone on board. Ever since then, locals have shared stories about seeing strange lights, hearing unexplained voices, or running into people who seem to appear out of nowhere. I never knew how much of it was just local folklore and how much people actually believed. Like most ghost stories, they get passed from one person to another, changing a little each time. I always thought they were interesting, but I never expected to experience anything myself. One day, a friend mentioned the haunted house that people supposedly searched for late at night. I had heard the name before, but never paid much attention to it. After our conversation, I got curious and decided to search online to see if there was any history behind it. I expected to find the usual ghost stories or people claiming to hear strange noises, but instead I found one story that stayed with me. According to what I read, a group of young people had driven up the mountain one night looking for the haunted house. There is a very popular lookout point at the top of the mountain, so people often drive up there, especially late at night. The story said that while they were driving around searching for the house, a man suddenly appeared from the bushes beside the road. He walked up to their car and warned them to go home because they were in danger. From what I remember, he did not threaten them or act aggressively. He simply told them they needed to leave. Instead of listening, they kept driving. A few kilometers farther down the road, the same man appeared again. That was the part that caught my attention. According to the story, there was no possible way he could have gotten there before them. They had driven the distance in a car. There were no shortcuts, no nearby roads, and no way someone on foot could have covered that much ground in only a couple of minutes. Yet somehow he was standing farther down the mountain, waiting for them again. I remember reading that story and thinking it was creepy, but I still did not completely believe it. The internet is full of made-up ghost stories, especially about places that already have a reputation for being haunted. It seemed like the kind of story people tell to scare each other before driving up the mountain. I thought it was entertaining, but I did not think much more about it after that. Not long afterward, a few friends and I decided to drive up to the lookout one night. It was not because we were trying to hunt ghosts or prove anything. The lookout is a popular place to visit anyway, especially late at night when the city lights look amazing from the top. We figured it would just be a fun drive. There were 3 of us in the car, and all of us already knew the stories about the mountain. We joked about them on the way up, but none of us seriously expected to see anything unusual. The drive to the top was completely normal. The mountain road twisted back and forth through the trees with long stretches where there were no buildings, no streetlights, and no signs of other people. Once you get far enough up, it feels isolated. During the day, it is beautiful, but at night, it feels very different. The trees block most of the moonlight, and the road seems to disappear into darkness around every corner. Even if you do not believe in ghosts, it is the kind of place that naturally puts you on edge. We spent some time at the lookout, talked, looked over the lights below, and eventually decided to head back down. By then it was around 3 in the morning. There were almost no other cars on the road. Everything was quiet. It felt like the entire mountain had gone to sleep. As we started driving down, I found myself thinking about the story I had read online. I even remember wondering what I would do if we actually saw someone standing on the side of the road. I laughed at the thought because it seemed ridiculous. It was just one of those creepy ideas that pop into your head when you are somewhere with a spooky reputation. Then we saw him. There was a man standing on the side of the road. The moment I noticed him, something inside me tightened. It was not because people cannot walk on mountain roads. Of course they can. It was because of where he was standing. There were no houses anywhere nearby, no parked cars, no broken down vehicle, nothing that explained why someone would be standing there alone at 3 o'clock in the morning. Just a man on the side of the road. He looked exactly like the description from the story I had read. For a second, nobody in the car said anything. We all just stared as we drove past him. He did not wave us down. He did not chase after us. He simply stood there. The area around him made the whole thing feel even stranger. Only a few meters from the road was a cliff with a steep drop. There were thick bushes, rocks, and dark forest surrounding the road. It was not a place where someone would normally be walking around in the middle of the night. After we passed him, all 3 of us started talking at once. Did you see him? That looked exactly like the guy from the story. What is someone doing up here? The more we talked about it, the more curious we became. Finally, we decided to turn the car around and go back. We wanted another look. We wanted to see if maybe there was a parked car hidden somewhere or another person nearby. We were trying to find any normal explanation. We drove back only a short distance. When we reached the exact spot where we had seen him, he was gone. Not walking away, not climbing down the cliff, not disappearing into the trees. Gone, we slowed down almost to a stop and looked everywhere. The headlights lit up both sides of the road. We searched the bushes. We looked toward the cliff. There was nowhere obvious for someone to disappear that quickly. If he had started running the moment we passed him, we should have seen him. If he had climbed down the cliff, it would have taken time. If he had hidden in the bushes, we should have noticed some movement. There was absolutely nothing. After a minute or two, we gave up. We laughed nervously, convincing ourselves he must have slipped into the trees somehow. It did not make complete sense, but it was still more believable than anything else. So we turned the car around again and continued driving back down the mountain. None of us were joking anymore. The atmosphere inside the car had completely changed. The road suddenly felt much darker than it had before. Every bend in the mountain made me wonder what might be waiting around the next corner. I kept thinking about the story online and trying to tell myself we were just letting it get into our heads. Then we saw him again, farther down the road. The same man, standing there. I cannot fully describe the feeling that hit me when I realized where he was. It was almost identical to the story I had read. There was no possible way he could have reached that point before us. We had only turned around briefly. We had searched the place where we first saw him. Then we drove straight down the mountain. Yet somehow, there he was again, much farther ahead. It was impossible. He could not have walked there. He could not have run there. There were no visible trails cutting across the mountain that would allow someone to reach that spot faster than a car driving on the road. The distance was simply too great. All three of us saw him. Nobody spoke for a few seconds because none of us knew what to say. We all understood exactly what we were looking at, and all of us remembered the story from the internet. It felt like we had somehow driven into the exact same experience those other people had described years earlier. This time, we did not turn around again. None of us wanted to. Curiosity had disappeared and been replaced with something much stronger. We were uncomfortable. Not terrified in the sense that we thought something was about to attack us, but deeply unsettled. Every instinct told us to keep driving and get off that mountain as quickly as possible. We continued down the road without stopping. Eventually, we reached the bottom of the mountain, where houses, streetlights, and other signs of normal life started appearing again. The tension slowly disappeared, but none of us could stop talking about what had happened. We went over every possible explanation we could think of. Maybe there were two different men. Maybe someone was playing a prank. Maybe we misunderstood where we first saw him. Maybe he had access to some hidden trail. Every explanation fell apart the more we thought about it. The mountain is not laid out in a way that makes any of those ideas easy to believe. The places where we saw him were simply too far apart, and the timing did not work. Even if he had started running the second we passed him, there was no realistic way he could have reached the second location before we did. That is what has stayed with me all these years. It was not just seeing a strange person late at night. It was seeing him twice, in places where he should not have been able to appear. Whenever I tell this story now, almost nobody believes me. They usually smile politely and assume I am exaggerating, or that we let an old ghost story influence what we thought we saw. I understand why people think that. If someone told me the exact same story without any witnesses, I would probably be skeptical too. The only people who believe me are the two friends who were sitting in that car with me. Because they saw him too. They watched us drive past him. They watched us turn around and find nothing. Then they watched him appear again farther down the mountain, just like the story we had read. To this day, I still cannot explain it. Maybe there is some perfectly ordinary answer that none of us have thought of. Maybe there was someone living rough on the mountain who knew hidden paths we never noticed. Maybe our memories filled in details because we already knew the local legend. I cannot completely rule those things out, but every time I remember that night, I come back to the same thought. Long before we ever drove up that mountain, someone else claimed a mysterious man warned them to leave, disappeared, and somehow appeared again impossibly far down the road. We laughed when we read that story. Then, at 3 o'clock in the morning, we experienced something so similar that it still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up whenever I think about it. Whether it was a ghost, a person, or something I still cannot explain, I know one thing for certain. There was a man on that mountain who seemed to be exactly where he should not have been. And all three of us saw him. One night, when I was still very young, my mother, my older sister, and I were driving home from church after dark. I was probably 8 or 9 years old at the time, and my sister was around 13 or 14. We lived on a ranch far outside town, where houses were spread so far apart that our nearest neighbors lived almost a full mile away. During the daytime, the open land felt peaceful. There were fields, fences, animals, and long dirt roads stretching beneath a huge sky. At night, however, the same place could feel completely different. Once the sun went down, the ranch became unbelievably dark and quiet. There were no streetlights, no nearby shops, and no steady sound of traffic. Unless the moon was bright, the only light came from the headlights of our vehicle and the lamps around our house. We were used to living far away from other people. To us, driving several miles down empty roads was normal. The silence did not usually frighten us because it was part of everyday life. We knew the shape of the land, the position of every fence, and the turns in the road. We knew which fields held cattle and where deer sometimes crossed. Even so, there were certain places on the ranch that felt more isolated than others, especially after dark. Our front gate was one of them. The gate stood at the entrance to the property, where the public road met the long dirt road leading toward our house. It was the kind of gate that had to be opened by hand. Whenever we arrived home, someone had to get out of the vehicle, unlatch it, swing it open, wait for the driver to pass through, and then close it again behind us. This was a normal part of living on a ranch. We had done it countless times. That night began like any other trip home from church. I do not remember anything unusual happening during the service or on the drive back. I was sitting in the vehicle with my mother and sister while the headlights cut through the darkness ahead of us. The road was mostly empty, as usual. We passed stretches of land where nothing could be seen beyond the reach of the headlights. There were no porch lights in the distance and no other vehicles behind us. My sister was old enough to open and close the gate, so she was usually the one who got out. When we finally reached the entrance to the ranch, my mother slowed the vehicle and stopped in front of it. The headlights shone across the metal gate, the nearby fence posts, and part of the dirt road beyond. My sister opened her door and stepped outside. At the time, neither my mother nor I thought anything of it. This was a simple task she had done many times before. She walked toward the gate, reached for the latch, and pulled it open. My mother waited until there was enough space, then drove through to the other side. Normally, my sister would have stayed behind for a moment, closed the gate, secured the latch, and then walked back to the vehicle. There was no reason for her to be afraid. We were on our own property, and nothing around us seemed unusual. But as soon as my mother stopped on the other side of the gate, everything changed. My sister suddenly threw open the vehicle door and jumped inside. She did not climb in calmly or complain about being cold. She rushed into the vehicle as if something were chasing her. She slammed the door behind her, and when I looked at her, tears were already streaming down her face. She was terrified. She kept begging my mother to drive. "Go," she said. "Please, just go." Her voice was shaking, and she was crying so hard that she could barely speak. My mother asked her what had happened, but my sister would not explain. She only kept telling her to drive away. I remember feeling confused more than anything else. One moment, everything had been normal. The next, my sister was inside the vehicle, crying in a way I had never seen before. I did not know whether she had seen an animal, heard someone moving nearby, or hurt herself while closing the gate. I turned toward the windows, trying to see what had frightened her, but the darkness outside seemed empty. My mother could tell that whatever had happened was serious. She did not stay there and argue. She pressed the gas and drove quickly down the dirt road toward our house. The gate was left behind us in the darkness. As we moved farther away, my sister kept looking back. Her breathing was fast and uneven. She had tears running down her cheeks, and she was trembling. My mother repeatedly asked her what she had seen, but my sister was too frightened to answer clearly. She only wanted us to get home. The distance between the gate and our house was not extremely long, but that night the drive felt much longer than usual. The headlights bounced over the dirt road, shining across fences and patches of grass. Outside the windows, the ranch was completely dark. I kept expecting something to appear behind us or beside the road. My imagination began to fill the empty land with possibilities. Maybe a stranger had been standing near the gate. Perhaps someone had been hiding behind a fence post. We lived so far from other people that the thought of a stranger waiting near our entrance was frightening. If someone had been there, we would have had no idea where they came from or why they were on our property. I looked at my sister again. Her fear did not seem like a joke or an attempt to scare me. She was not pretending. Her face had gone pale, and she looked as if she had witnessed something truly terrible. She could not stop crying. When we finally reached the house, my mother parked close to the entrance. We hurried inside, turned on the lights, and locked the doors. The familiar room should have made us feel safe, but my sister's terror followed us inside. My mother sat her down and tried to calm her. She told her that we were home now and asked her to explain what had happened at the gate. It took my sister a while to speak. When she finally began, she told us that after opening the gate, she had looked down the dirt road. About 20 feet away from her, she had seen a face. At first, I did not understand what she meant. I thought she might have seen a person standing there. But she did not describe a normal person. She said the face was pale white, almost ghostly, and seemed to be floating in the darkness. It was positioned around 6 feet above the ground, about the height of a tall adult's head. Yet she could not see a body beneath it. There were no shoulders, arms, or clothing that she could make out. There was only the face. She said she had seen the details very clearly. The eyes were dark, much darker than the rest of the face. She could not see any hair. The skin looked unnaturally white, especially against the blackness around it. The face was looking directly toward her. And it was smiling. That was the part of her description that disturbed me most. It was not a friendly smile or the expression of someone who had unexpectedly seen another person. She described it as an unsettling smile, the kind that made her feel immediately unsafe. Whatever she had seen did not seem surprised to find her there. It appeared to have been waiting in the darkness, watching the gate. My sister said that when she first noticed it, she froze. For a moment, she could not move. She stared at the face, trying to understand what she was looking at. There was not enough light for a normal person to be so clearly visible. The headlights were pointed mostly toward the open gate and the road ahead, but the face seemed pale enough to stand out on its own. She could see the dark eyes, the smooth head, and the smile. Then her fear took control. She rushed back to the vehicle, opened the door, and jumped inside. I had not seen the face myself. I had been sitting in the vehicle with my mother, probably looking forward or thinking about something else. Because I did not witness it, I could not say for certain what had been standing near the road. But I had seen my sister's reaction. It would have been extremely difficult for her to fake that kind of fear. She had tears running down her face before she even got inside. Her panic was immediate. She had not taken time to invent a story or decide how she was going to act. She had simply run. The fear stayed with her after we arrived home. She did not laugh or admit that it was a joke. She did not suddenly calm down once she had everyone's attention. She continued to look frightened as she described the face. My mother tried to find a normal explanation. Perhaps my sister had seen an animal. Ranches are full of creatures that can appear strange at night. A deer's face caught in the headlights can look pale. The eyes of animals can reflect light and create the illusion of something staring from the darkness. Owls can sit at unusual heights and have pale faces with dark eyes. But none of those explanations seemed to match what my sister described. She knew what the animals around our ranch looked like. She had lived there for years. She had seen deer, coyotes, dogs, owls, cattle, and other animals in darkness before. She insisted that this was not an animal. She had seen a human-looking face. My mother also considered the possibility that someone had been standing near the road. Maybe a person had wandered onto our property. But that raised even more frightening questions. Why would someone be standing in the darkness near our gate? Where was the rest of their body? Why had my sisters seen only the face? Why were they smiling at her instead of speaking or asking for help? Our nearest neighbors lived about a mile away. A stranger would have had to walk a long distance through dark rural land to reach the gate. There were no houses close enough for someone to step outside and wander over casually. If a person had been there, they had chosen an extremely strange place to stand. My sister also said the face lacked hair and looked too white to be normal. It did not seem like the face of a ranch worker, a lost traveler, or a neighbor. My mother did not drive back to the gate that night. None of us wanted to return and search the area. Even if there had been a logical explanation, the idea of finding out was too frightening. We stayed inside with the lights on and tried to convince ourselves that we were safe. For me, the experience was strange because I had not seen the face, yet I was still affected by it. I kept picturing it based on my sister's description. I imagined a pale head floating 6 feet above the dirt road, dark eyes staring through the night, and a wide smile fixed across its mouth. I wondered how long it had been standing there before she noticed it. Had it watched our vehicle approach from a distance? Had it been waiting beside the road before we arrived? Did it move closer after my sister stepped outside? Those questions made it difficult to sleep. From my bedroom, the darkness outside the windows looked deeper than it usually did. Every faint sound around the house made me nervous. Ranch houses are never completely silent at night. Wood can creak as the temperature changes. Wind moves against the walls and roof. Animals shift in pens or fields. Insects tap against windows. Normally, those sounds were familiar. That night, each one seemed connected to the white face. I imagined it leaving the gate and following the road toward our house. I imagined looking out a window and seeing it staring back at me. My sister was older than I was, and I usually saw her as braver and more independent. Watching her become so frightened affected me deeply. If something could terrify her that badly, then it had to be serious. In the days that followed, the gate became an uncomfortable place. During daylight, it looked completely ordinary. There was the dirt road, the fence, the grass, and the open land beyond it. There was nowhere obvious for someone to hide. Nothing about the area explained what my sister had seen. At night, however, the gate felt different. Whenever we drove toward it after dark, I looked down the road, searching for a pale shape. I tried to focus on every fence post and shadow. Sometimes a piece of light-colored wood or a distant sign would catch the headlights, and for one frightening second I would think the face had returned. My sister did not see it again, at least not that I know of. No one else in the family reported seeing the same thing. There were no strange tracks near the road, no reports of a missing person, and no neighbor who came forward to say they had been walking near our property that night. The experience remained unexplained. Then, sometime later, our family learned something about the history of the ranch. There were 2 unmarked graves on the property. They dated back to the 1800s. I do not remember exactly how we found out about them. Perhaps someone who knew the area's history told us, or old property information revealed their location. What mattered was that two people had been buried somewhere on our land, and there were no normal grave markers to identify them. That discovery changed the way we thought about my sister's experience. Until then, the white face at the gate could have been dismissed as a trick of the light, an animal, or a frightened teenager misunderstanding what she saw. But learning that there were graves on the property gave the event a much darker feeling. The ranch had existed long before our family lived there. People had traveled through that land, worked on it, suffered there, and died there. The graves were proof that our home had a history we did not fully understand. We did not know much about the people buried there. We did not know their names, how they had died, or why their graves had been left unmarked. In the 1800s, life in rural areas could be harsh and dangerous. People died from illness, accidents, violence, and exposure. Families sometimes buried loved ones on private land because cemeteries were too far away. It was possible that the graves were innocent family burials. They might have belonged to early settlers who had lived peacefully on the property and wanted to be buried near their home. But without names or records, we could not know. The lack of information allowed our minds to imagine darker possibilities. Maybe the people had died suddenly. Maybe they had been buried in secret. Perhaps no one had cared enough to mark the graves. Or perhaps someone had wanted their resting places forgotten. We also did not know whether the face my sister saw had any connection to those graves. The timing and location might have been nothing more than coincidence. Even if ghosts exist, there was no reason to assume the person she saw was one of the people buried on the ranch. Still, it was difficult not to connect the two things. A pale, hairless face appeared beside a lonely dirt road on a property containing forgotten graves. It watched a young girl open the gate and smiled at her from the darkness. That image never became easier to explain. Over time, I began to think about the face differently. When I was a child, I pictured it as something openly evil, a creature waiting beside the gate to frighten or harm my sister. As I grew older, I wondered whether the smile might have had another meaning. Maybe it was not trying to threaten her. Perhaps it was simply watching. Maybe whatever she saw had been alone on that land for more than a century. The arrival of our vehicle and the sight of someone stepping into the road might have caused it to show itself for a brief moment. The smile could have been an attempt to appear friendly, even if it looked terrifying. But that possibility does not make the story much more comforting. A normal person smiles using their whole face. The eyes change, the cheeks rise, and the expression feels human. My sister described something that looked wrong. The dark eyes and the pale skin did not match the smile. It seemed to be copying a human expression without understanding how it should look. That may have been why she became so frightened. There is a natural fear that comes from seeing something almost human, but not completely human. The mind recognizes the shape of a face, yet small details tell us that something is wrong. My sister did not need time to think through those details. Her body reacted immediately. She ran before she could explain why. Even now, I cannot prove what she saw. I was only a child sitting in the vehicle, and by the time I knew something had happened, my sister was already inside, begging my mother to drive. I never looked directly at the place where the face had been. Part of me regrets that. I sometimes wonder whether I might have seen it too if I had looked out the window at the right moment. Maybe it remained beside the road as we drove away, watching our vehicle disappear toward the house. Another part of me is grateful that I did not see it. My sister's terror was enough. Years have passed, but the story still returns to my mind whenever I think about the ranch at night. I remember the empty road, the gate, and the darkness. beyond the headlights. I remember my sister suddenly jumping into the vehicle with tears covering her face. I remember how urgently she begged our mother to drive. Most of all, I remember her description: a white face about 20 feet away, dark eyes, no hair, 6 feet above the ground, no visible body, and an unsettling smile. Had she calmly told us about it later, I might have believed she had imagined the whole thing. But I watched her reaction the moment it happened. I saw the panic before she had time to create a story. Whatever she saw, it was real enough to make a teenage girl run for her life. Maybe there was a person standing near the gate. Maybe there was an animal positioned in a way that created the illusion of a human face. Perhaps the headlights reflected from something beside the road, and her mind completed the image. Those explanations are possible. But none of them fully explains the details she saw, or the fear that followed her home. The two unmarked graves remain the most disturbing part of the story. They remind us that the ranch belonged to other people before us, and that not every part of its history was known. Somewhere on that land, two people from the 1800s were buried without names or stones to show where they rested. Perhaps the face at the gate had nothing to do with them. Perhaps it had everything to do with them. We never saw it again, and we never found a clear answer. The gate continued to stand at the entrance to the ranch, looking completely ordinary during the day. But after that night, none of us thought of it as an ordinary place. Whenever we returned home after dark, we watched the road more carefully. And no one wanted to be the one who got out of the vehicle alone.
The broadcast is ending, but some voices do not disappear when the radio goes quiet. Maybe one of tonight's confessions will stay with you. Maybe you will remember it the next time your phone rings at an odd hour, or when you hear something outside after midnight. Leave a comment with the story that got under your skin the most. Subscribe to Dead Air Confessions for more stories from the people who called in after something went wrong.